That boy was abandoned by the lake, until a poor woman with nothing but love picked him up and raised him as her own. She starved so he could eat, struggled so he could succeed, and years later, he became rich beyond imagination. But the day his real mother showed up, everything changed. In front of his mansion, the woman who sacrificed everything for him was dragged out like a stranger. And he stood there, watching, and said just 6 words that would destroy her heart forever. What he didn't know was that moment would cost him everything. Hello fam, welcome to True Love Stories, where we share interesting and intriguing stories. Please do well to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Do not forget to like and share with your loved ones. Now let's dive into the story. The morning air over Lake Greenwood carried a quiet stillness, the kind that usually brought Denise Carter a small sense of peace before the weight of the day settled in. At 42, Denise had grown used to a life of routine and sacrifice. She worked long hours as a home health aide, caring for others while having no one waiting for her at home. The early walks by the lake were her only moments of solitude, her time to breathe, to think, and sometimes to wonder how life might have been different if she had a family of her own. That morning, however, something disrupted the calm. At first, she thought it was just the cry of a bird or the wind brushing through the trees. But then it came again, sharper this time, fragile and desperate. A baby's cry. Denise froze, her heart skipping. She turned toward the direction of the sound, scanning the quiet shoreline. The lake stretched out in front of her, still and gray beneath the early light. But the crying continued, pulling her toward a cluster of bushes near the water's edge. Her steps quickened. "Hello," she called out instinctively, though she knew no one was likely to answer. The cry grew louder as she pushed past the damp grass and low branches. And then she saw him. A baby boy, no more than a few days old, lay wrapped in a thin, worn blanket. His tiny face was red from crying, his small hands trembling as the cold morning air clung to his fragile body. He had been left so close to the water that one wrong movement could have carried him away. "Oh my God," Denise whispered, rushing forward. Without hesitation, she knelt down and scooped him up into her arms. His crying softened almost instantly as he felt the warmth of her body. Denise held him close, instinctively rocking him, her heart pounding with a mix of shock, anger, and something deeper, something she hadn't felt in years. Connection. "It's okay, baby. You're all right now," she murmured, her voice trembling. She looked around, hoping, almost expecting, someone to come running out, to explain, to claim him. But there was nothing. Just silence, the lake, and the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze. Someone had left him there. On purpose. Denise's chest tightened at the thought. She couldn't understand how anyone could walk away from something so small, so helpless. Her grip tightened protectively, as if shielding him from a world that had already failed him once. Unseen by Denise, there was someone else there. From a distance, partially hidden behind a cluster of trees, a young woman stood watching. Her name was Isabella. Her eyes were fixed on the scene, filled with conflict, fear, shame, and a cold determination she had forced herself to hold on to. She had spent the entire night wrestling with her decision, pacing, crying, nearly turning back more times than she could count. But in the end, fear of judgment had outweighed everything else. She had convinced herself that abandoning the child was the only way to protect her life, her image, her future. As she watched Denise cradle the baby, something inside her cracked. The tenderness, the immediate love, it was everything Isabella knew she could not give. Or perhaps everything she refused to try. For a brief moment, she took a step forward. But then she stopped. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered under her breath, "He'll be better off. He has to be." And with that, she turned and walked away, each step heavier than the last, leaving behind not just the child, but the truth of what she had done. Back by the lake, Denise adjusted the blanket around the baby, shielding him from the cold as best as she could. Her mind raced. She knew she should call the authorities, follow the proper steps, but even as those thoughts came, something stronger rooted itself in her heart. She looked down at him again. He had stopped crying completely now, his tiny fingers curling gently against her coat as if he already trusted her. As if he had chosen her. Denise felt tears well up in her eyes. "I don't know where you came from," she said softly, "but you're not alone anymore. You hear me? You got me now." In that moment, the loneliness she had carried for years began to dissolve, replaced by something powerful and undeniable, a sense of purpose. She stood there for a while longer, holding him, memorizing the weight of him in her arms, the warmth of his small body, the quiet bond that had formed in an instant. The sun slowly began to rise, casting golden light across the lake. And just like that, Denise Carter's life changed forever. Later that day, after the authorities were notified and the necessary procedures began, Denise made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She would not let him go. After weeks of paperwork, visits, and questioning, the baby boy was officially placed in her care. When the time came to give him a name, Denise didn't hesitate. She looked down at him, smiling softly as he slept peacefully in her arms. "Elijah," she whispered. "Elijah Carter." Her son. From the moment Elijah Carter entered her life, Denise understood that love alone wouldn't be enough. He would need stability, opportunity, and a future far greater than anything she had ever known. And she made a quiet promise to herself that day. No matter what it cost her, Elijah would never feel the kind of emptiness she had carried for most of her. The early years were the hardest. Denise's small apartment, already modest, suddenly felt even tighter with a crib squeezed beside her bed and baby supplies stacked in every corner. Bills didn't stop coming just because she had taken on the responsibility of a child. If anything, they came faster. Formula, diapers, doctor visits, it all added up quickly. Still, she never once considered giving up. She adjusted her work schedule, picking up overnight shifts whenever she could so she could spend her days with Elijah. Sleep became a luxury she rarely enjoyed. Some nights, she would come home exhausted, her feet aching and her back sore, only to stay awake rocking Elijah when he cried. But she never complained. "You worth it, baby," she would whisper, pressing a kiss to his forehead. As Elijah grew, so did Denise's determination. When he took his first steps, she clapped and laughed like he had just won a championship. When he said his first word, "Mama," she cried harder than she had the day she found him. Every milestone, no matter how small, felt like a victory they had earned together. Money, however, remained a constant struggle. Denise became an expert at stretching every dollar. She learned which stores had the best discounts, which bills could wait a few extra days, and how to turn simple ingredients into full meals. There were nights when dinner was nothing more than rice and beans, but Elijah never noticed, because his plate was always full. "Eat up, baby," she'd say with a smile. "What about you, Mama?" he'd ask, his big, curious eyes fixed on her. "I already ate at work," she would reply smoothly. It wasn't true, but Elijah didn't know that. What he did know was that his mother was always there. At every school event, every parent-teacher meeting, every small moment that mattered. When Elijah started school, Denise made another decision, one that stretched her even further. She enrolled him in a better school district across town. It meant longer commutes, earlier mornings, and higher expenses, but Denise refused to let him be limited by his environment. "You're gonna be great one day," she told him as she helped him get ready for his first day. "Don't let nobody tell you different." Elijah carried those words with him. He quickly stood out, not just because he was smart, but because he was driven. While other kids complained about homework, Elijah stayed focused. He studied hard, asked questions, and pushed himself in ways that surprised even his teachers. "Ms. Carter," one teacher said during a conference, "your son is exceptional." Denise smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "I already know," she replied. But behind that pride was sacrifice no one else saw. There were days Denise skipped meals entirely, so she could afford Elijah's school supplies. She wore the same clothes year after year, carefully mending them when they wore out. When her old car broke down, she took 2 buses just to get to work, and still made it back in time to help Elijah with his homework. She never let him see the struggle. To Elijah, life felt simple, safe, loved. And in many ways it was. As he grew into his teenage years, their bond deepened. They shared jokes, late-night talks, and quiet moments that didn't need words. Denise wasn't just his mother. She was his best friend, his biggest supporter, and the one person he trusted above all else. "Mama," he said one night while they sat together on the couch, "when I grow up, I'm going to take care of you. You ain't never gotta work again." Denise laughed softly, brushing her hand against his cheek. "Just be a good man. That's all I want." But Elijah meant every word. He saw her sacrifices, even if he didn't fully understand them yet. He noticed the way she always put him first, the way she showed up no matter how tired she was, the way she believed in him even when things got tough. And that belief became the foundation of who he was becoming. Years passed, and Elijah continued to excel. Scholarships, awards, recognition. Doors began to open for him, doors Denise had only dreamed of. Each success felt like proof that her sacrifices had meaning. That every missed meal, every sleepless night, every struggle, it was all worth it. One evening, as Denise watched Elijah studying at the small kitchen table, she allowed herself a rare moment to sit back and take it all in. The boy she found crying by the lake had grown into something extraordinary. And though the world hadn't given her much, she had given him everything. What Denise didn't know was that the very love she poured into Elijah would one day be tested in ways she never imagined. Elijah Carter's rise didn't happen overnight. It was built on years of discipline, quiet sacrifice, and the unwavering belief his mother had planted in him long ago. From scholarships that carried him through college to sleepless nights spent building ideas into reality, Elijah refused to settle for anything less than greatness. And eventually greatness answered. By the time he turned 30, Elijah had become a name people respected in Atlanta's growing tech scene. His company, born from a small startup idea, had evolved into a powerful business generating millions. He moved into a sleek mansion in Buckhead, drove cars he once only saw in music videos, and sat at tables with people who spoke the language of wealth and influence. But no matter how high he climbed, one thing remained constant: Denise. The day he handed her the keys to her own room in his mansion, her hands trembled. "All this for me?" she asked, her voice soft with disbelief. Elijah smiled, pulling her into a hug. "For us, Mama. You ain't gotta struggle no more." For a while, life felt like a reward they had both earned. Denise adjusted slowly to the new environment, still holding on to her humble habits, waking early, cooking meals, and occasionally reminding Elijah not to waste money like it grows on trees. Elijah would laugh. "It kinda do now, Mama." But success had a way of changing more than just circumstances. It changed environments, expectations, and the people who surrounded you. Elijah's world began to shift. Business meetings turned into high-profile events. Casual friendships turned into strategic relationships. The conversations around him grew less about survival and more about status, image, and legacy. And somewhere within that new world, a door opened, one that should have stayed closed. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. Elijah was in his office reviewing contracts when his assistant hesitated at the door. "There's a woman here asking to see you," she said. "She says it's personal." Elijah frowned slightly. "Did she give a name?" The assistant nodded. "Isabella Reed." The name meant nothing to him. "Send her in," he said. Moments later, Isabella walked in, composed, elegant, and carrying a presence that immediately shifted the atmosphere in the room. She was dressed in understated luxury, her posture confident, but her eyes carried something heavier. Emotion. "Elijah," she said softly. There was something about the way she said his name that made him sit up straighter. "Do I know you?" he asked, cautious but curious. Isabella took a slow breath, her fingers tightening slightly around her handbag. "No," she replied. "But I've known you your whole life." A silence fell between them, thick and unsettling. Elijah leaned back, his expression hardening just a bit. "What does that mean?" Her eyes began to glisten. "It means," she said carefully, "that I'm your mother." The words landed like a shockwave. Elijah stared at her, searching her face for any sign of dishonesty, confusion, anything that would make sense of what he had just heard. "That's not possible," he said quickly. "My mother is the woman who raised you," Isabella interrupted gently. "And I will never take that away from her." That caught him off guard. She didn't sound aggressive. She didn't sound demanding. She sounded regretful. "I was young," she continued, her voice trembling just enough to feel real. "Scared. I didn't have support, and I made the worst decision of my life. I left you somewhere I prayed someone kind would find you." Elijah's chest tightened. The lake. A memory he didn't even know he had seemed to echo faintly in his mind, not as an image, but as a feeling. "I've spent every day since then wondering where you were," Isabella said, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Hoping you were safe, hoping you were loved." He didn't speak. Couldn't. Because a part of him, small but undeniable, wanted to believe her. "I didn't come here to take anything from you," she added softly. "I just wanted to see you, to know the man you became." Elijah exhaled slowly, his thoughts tangled. Everything he knew about his life had been simple, grounded in one truth. Denise was his mother. But now, there was another truth standing in front of him. Flesh and blood. "I need time," he finally said. Isabella nodded, as if she had expected that. "Take all the time you need." As she turned to leave, she paused briefly. "She must have loved you very much," Isabella said, her back still turned, "to raise you the way she did." Elijah didn't respond, but her words lingered long after she was gone. That night, he sat alone in his mansion, staring out at the city lights. For the first time in years, he felt uncertain, conflicted. Two worlds, one built on sacrifice and love, the other on truth and blood, had collided. And though he didn't realize it yet, a seed had been planted, one that would grow quietly, steadily, until it began to change everything he thought he knew. At first, Elijah kept Isabella at a distance. Their interactions were brief, carefully measured conversations over coffee, occasional phone calls that felt more like interviews than reunions. He asked questions, trying to piece together a past he had never known. Isabella answered each one with practiced vulnerability, her voice often soft, her eyes carrying just enough sorrow to feel convincing. "I never stopped thinking about you," she would say. Not for a single day. Elijah wanted to believe her. In some ways, he did. But something inside him remained anchored to Denise, the woman who had lived every moment of his life with him, not just watched from afar. Still, Isabella was patient. She didn't push. She didn't demand a place in his life. Instead, she positioned herself carefully, strategically. She began appearing more often, invited at first, then expected. She blended effortlessly into Elijah's world, adapting to his lifestyle in ways that Denise never tried to. At business dinners, she spoke with elegance. Around his colleagues, she carried herself with confidence and refinement. She understood the language of wealth, of status, of perception. And slowly, subtly, she began to reshape the way Elijah saw things. Not through confrontation, but through suggestion. "You've built such an incredible life," she said one evening as they sat in his living room. "It's impressive." Elijah nodded, glancing around. "It took a lot." "I can imagine," she replied. Then, after a pause, "But I wonder how much further you could have gone with the right foundation from the start." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Isabella tilted her head gently. "I mean no disrespect. The woman who raised you, she did what she could. But she didn't have access to the kind of opportunities, the kind of environment that could have elevated you even sooner." Elijah didn't respond immediately. The words weren't harsh, but they lingered. Over time, those comments became more frequent. Small, subtle, persistent. "She kept you safe, yes, but did she challenge you the way you needed?" Sometimes love alone isn't enough to unlock someone's full potential. You succeeded because of who you are. Imagine what you could have been with more. Each statement planted doubt, never loud enough to alarm him, but steady enough to take root. At the same time, the contrast between the two women in his life became harder to ignore. Denise remained exactly who she had always been, warm, simple, and grounded. She still woke up early to cook, still worried about things Elijah no longer had to think about, still spoke in the same familiar tone that carried years of love behind it. But now, in Elijah's new world, those same qualities began to feel out of place. At corporate gatherings, Denise stayed quiet, often sitting to the side, unsure of how to engage with Elijah's polished circle. Her laughter was louder, her presence more genuine, but in rooms filled with calculated conversations, it stood out. And Isabella noticed. "She doesn't belong in these spaces," Isabella said gently one night after an event. "And that's not her fault. It's just reality." Elijah sighed. "She's my mother." "I know," Isabella replied quickly. "And she always will be in her own way." In her own way. That phrase stayed with him. The shift in Elijah wasn't sudden, it was gradual. He started spending more time with Isabella, drawn to the ease with which she navigated his world. Their conversations felt aligned with the life he was living now. She understood things Denise never had to, or never could. Meanwhile, his time with Denise grew shorter. Conversations became rushed. Moments they once shared effortlessly now felt strained. Denise noticed. A mother always does. "Elijah, you've been busy lately," she said one evening, watching him scroll through his phone. "Yeah, work's been crazy," he replied without looking up. She nodded slowly. "You eating all right?" "I'm good, Mama." There was a pause. "Everything okay?" she asked softly. Elijah finally looked at her, but only for a moment. "Yeah, everything's fine." But it wasn't. Not anymore. The tension reached its breaking point on a quiet afternoon. Denise had spent the morning cooking Elijah's favorite meal, fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread. It was her way of reconnecting, of holding on to something that felt like home. Carrying the food in containers, she made her way to the mansion, her heart light with hope. But when she arrived, everything changed. Security stopped her at the gate. "Ma'am, you can't enter without authorization." Denise frowned, confused. "I'm Elijah's mother. I don't need no authorization." The guard remained firm. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I need clearance." Inside the house, Isabella stood near the window, watching calmly. "Elijah," she called, her voice smooth. "There's someone at the gate." Elijah stepped outside, his expression already tense. When he saw Denise standing there, holding the food, something inside him tightened. But instead of moving toward her, he hesitated. "Mama," Denise called out, relief flooding her face. "They won't let me in." There it was, that familiar warmth, that unconditional love in her voice. But behind him, Isabella's presence lingered like a shadow. Elijah's jaw clenched. "Let her in," a part of him wanted to say. But another part, the one shaped by pride, by image, by the quiet influence that had been building, held him back. "Marcus," Denise started, catching herself. "Elijah, baby, I brought you something to eat." "Stop," he said suddenly. The word cut through the air. Denise froze. Elijah stepped forward slightly, his voice lower now. Colder. "That's not necessary." Her smile faded. "What you mean?" I said it's not necessary," he repeated. Silence fell. The guards shifted uncomfortably. Denise's hands trembled slightly as she clutched the containers. "Elijah, what's going on?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced back briefly, just enough to see Isabella standing behind him, watching, waiting. And then, in a moment that would haunt him for the rest of his life, Elijah made his choice. "She's not my mother," he said. The words hung in the air like something irreversible. Denise's face crumpled, the pain immediate and raw. What you say?" "She's not my mother," Elijah repeated, louder this time. "Please remove her." "No." "Elijah, no," Denise cried, stepping forward before the guards held her back. "It's me, baby. I'm your mama. I raised you." But he turned away. He couldn't face her. As the guards began to escort Denise out, her voice broke into sobs. "Elijah, please, look at me." For a split second, he almost did. But he didn't. And just like that, she was gone. The gate closed. The silence that followed was suffocating. Elijah stood there, unmoving, a strange unease settling deep in his chest. Behind him, Isabella placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You did what you had to do," she whispered. But for the first time since she entered his life, it didn't feel right. At first, the discomfort Elijah felt after that day came and went in quiet waves. He buried it the only way he knew how, through work. Meetings became longer, decisions more aggressive, and risks more frequent. If there was a voice in his head reminding him of Denise's tears, he drowned it out with ambition. But life has a way of forcing you to face what you try to ignore. The trouble began subtly. A delayed payment here. A contract dispute there. At first, Elijah wasn't worried. In business, small issues were normal. Fixable. He had built his company from nothing. He knew how to handle pressure. But within weeks, those small problems began to multiply. A major investor suddenly pulled out of a key deal without warning. A partner company accused Elijah's firm of breaching contract terms. Legal notices started arriving, one after another. Accounts were frozen pending investigation. Projects stalled. Employees grew uneasy. Then came the hit that shook everything. A financial audit revealed discrepancies, large ones. Money that had supposedly been allocated to certain projects had been redirected. Missing funds. Unclear transactions. Elijah was blindsided. "This doesn't make any sense," he snapped during an emergency meeting. "Check it again." "We already did," his financial officer replied, tense. "Multiple times." The room was heavy with silence. For the first time since building his empire, Elijah felt something unfamiliar creeping in. Loss of control. Support disappeared. And in the middle of it all, Elijah turned to the one person he believed was firmly on his side. "Isabella, I need you right now," he told her one evening, his voice strained as he sat in the dimly lit living room. "Everything's falling apart." Isabella listened quietly, her expression unreadable. "That's why I'm here," she said softly, stepping closer. "You're not alone." For a brief moment, Elijah felt relief. He wasn't completely abandoned. Or so he thought. As the pressure mounted, Elijah became consumed with trying to save what was left of his company. He spent long nights going over documents, meeting with lawyers, chasing solutions that seemed to slip further away each day. He barely slept, barely ate, and most importantly, he stopped paying attention. One night, exhausted and overwhelmed, Elijah fell asleep in his office. By morning, everything was gone. His safe had been emptied. Cash reserves gone. Important documents gone. Expensive watches, jewelry, backups of sensitive information gone. And Isabella was nowhere to be found. At first, he thought there had been some kind of break-in. But there were no signs of forced entry. No alarms triggered. No struggle. Just absence. Then it hit him. Slow. Heavy. Unavoidable. She didn't run from the chaos. She created her exit through it. "Elijah," his assistant said cautiously later that day, "we can't reach Ms. Isabella. Her phone is disconnected." Of course it was. The realization settled deep into his chest like a weight he couldn't lift. The woman he had chosen, the one he had trusted over everything, had taken what she could and left him to collapse. Alone. That night, Elijah sat in the dark. No lights. No distractions. Just silence. The mansion that once felt like a symbol of his success now felt empty, cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. And for the first time since his rise, Elijah Carter broke. He leaned forward, his hands covering his face as tears slipped through his fingers. Not quiet tears. Not controlled ones. The kind that come when everything you've built, externally and internally, comes crashing down at once. Images flooded his mind. Denise standing at the gate, her voice calling his name, the pain in her eyes. "I'm your mama." His chest tightened painfully. "I threw her away," he whispered hoarsely. "I threw her away for nothing." Karma didn't arrive loudly. It arrived in realization. In loss. In the understanding that he had abandoned the only person who had never once considered abandoning him. And now, he knew exactly what that felt like. By the end of the week, Elijah had lost almost everything. His company was dismantling under legal pressure. His accounts were frozen. His assets were tied up in investigations. The mansion itself was no longer truly his. It was collateral waiting to be claimed. The world he built was gone, and in its place stood a man forced to confront the truth he had run from. Money could be rebuilt. Reputation could be repaired. But what he had done to Denise, that was different. Sitting alone in the darkness, Elijah wiped his face slowly, his voice barely audible. I gotta find her. Not because he deserved forgiveness, but because he finally understood what he had lost. Finding Denise wasn't easy. Elijah quickly realized that when you've spent years building a life far removed from where you came from, retracing your steps isn't as simple as turning back. The neighborhoods felt different now. Smaller, quieter. Or maybe it was just him, stripped of status, stripped of certainty, seeing things for what they truly were. He asked around. Old neighbors, local owners, people who still remembered Denise Carter, the kind woman who worked too hard and gave too much. Yeah, she don't come around much no more, one woman said, shaking her head. Health ain't been the same. Each answer tightened something in his chest. Days turned into weeks before he finally found her. A small house. Modest. Worn but clean. The kind of place built on necessity, not comfort. It stood in a quiet neighborhood where life moved slower, where people minded their business and held on to what little they had. Elijah stood outside the door for a long time. His hand hovered near the surface, but he couldn't bring himself to knock. What do you say after breaking someone like that? Finally, he did. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Slow footsteps approached from inside. And then the door opened. Denise stood there. She looked smaller than he remembered. Frilier. Time and hardship had left their marks. Her shoulders slightly bent, her face thinner, her movements slower. But her eyes were still the same. Warm. Kind. And in that moment, they widened with shock. Elijah? His name left her lips like something fragile. He couldn't speak. Not at first. All the words he had rehearsed, all the apologies he had tried to form, they disappeared the second he saw her. So instead, he dropped to his knees. I'm sorry. The words came out broken, barely holding together under the weight of everything behind them. I'm sorry, Mama. I'm so sorry. Denise didn't move, didn't speak. She just looked at him, taking in the sight of the man who had once turned his back on her, now reduced to tears at her doorstep. I messed up, he continued, his voice shaking. I let someone come between us. I let pride, money, all of it get in my head. And I hurt you. His head lowered. I hurt the one person who never hurt me. Tears hit the ground beneath him. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even deserve it. I needed to say it. I needed you to hear it from me. Silence stretched between them. Heavy. Uncertain. Elijah braced himself for rejection. For anger. For the kind of response he knew he had earned. But Denise was Denise. She stepped forward slowly. And then, without hesitation, she wrapped her arms around him. Elijah froze. You still my son, she said softly. That was it. No lecture. No anger. No conditions. Just love. And somehow, that hurt more than anything else. He held on to her tightly, like someone afraid of losing something all over again. I don't deserve you, he whispered. Denise pulled back slightly, placing her hand on his face the way she used to when he was a child. Maybe not, she said gently. But that don't change what you are to me. Elijah let out a shaky breath, overwhelmed. I lost everything, he admitted. The company, the house, all of it. She took what was left and ran. Denise nodded slowly, not surprised, but not satisfied either. Sometimes, she said, life got a way of teaching lessons we don't want to learn. He swallowed hard. I understand that now. She studied him for a moment, seeing something different. Not the confident, untouchable man the world had known, but the boy she raised. Humbled. Broken. Real. Come inside, she said, stepping aside. That simple invitation felt like more than he deserved. The house was small, but it was warm. Familiar in a way that immediately stirred memories. Old furniture, the faint smell of home-cooked meals, the quiet comfort of a life built on sincerity rather than appearance. Elijah sat down carefully, taking it all in. "This where you been?" he asked quietly. Denise nodded. "It's enough." He shook his head slightly, guilt creeping back in. "You should have never had to go through that alone." She looked at him calmly. "I wasn't alone." He frowned. "I had God," she said simply. "And I had the memories of raising you. That carried me." Elijah lowered his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. "I want to make things right," he said after a moment. "I know I can't fix what I did, but I want to try. If you'll let me." Denise didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to, because the moment she let him in, she already had. "We gon' take it one day at a time," she said finally. Elijah nodded. That was more than enough. That night, for the first time in a long time, Elijah didn't feel lost. He didn't have wealth. He didn't have status. But sitting there in that small house, across from the woman who had every reason to turn him away, but didn't, he had something real again. And this time, he understood its value. Starting over humbled Elijah in ways success never could. There were no shortcuts this time. No powerful connections stepping in to fix things. No safety net built from wealth or influence. Just him, his mistakes, and the quiet determination to rebuild, not just his life, but his character. He took on small jobs at first. Consulting work. Freelance projects. Anything that allowed him to earn honestly and stay afloat. The man who once ran $1 million company now sat at a modest desk, working long hours just to piece together a new beginning. And every evening, he came home to Denise. Not to a mansion, not to luxury, but to something far more grounding. Peace. Denise never reminded him of what he had done. She didn't need to. The way Elijah moved now, the way he spoke, the way he carried himself, it was clear he hadn't forgotten. He made sure she never lacked anything again. He handled the bills, cooked meals, took her to doctor's appointments, sat with her during quiet evenings, sometimes talking, sometimes just being present. In many ways, their roles had shifted, but the love between them remained unchanged. Stronger, even. "I'm proud of you," Denise told him one night as they sat on the porch. Elijah shook his head. "I ain't done nothing yet." She smiled softly. "You learning? That's something." And she was right. Elijah had learned that success without loyalty meant nothing. That wealth without gratitude was empty. That the people who stand by you when you have nothing are the ones who truly matter. Months passed. Then a year. Slowly, opportunity found him again, but this time it came differently. Not through flashy deals or risky ventures, but through trust. People began to notice his resilience, his honesty, his ability to rebuild from the ground up. A former colleague reached out with a small partnership opportunity. Elijah approached it carefully. No shortcuts, no arrogance. Just work. The business grew. Steadily. Honestly. And before long, Elijah found himself rising again. But this time, his foundation was different. Stronger. When success returned, he didn't chase the same lifestyle. He chose stability over show, purpose over pride. He bought a comfortable home, not extravagant, but filled with everything Denise needed to live peacefully. And she did. Her health improved with time, her smile returning more often, her spirit as warm as it had always been. One evening, as they sat together watching the sun dip below the horizon, Elijah spoke quietly. "I still think about that day," he admitted. "What I did, how I treated you." Denise didn't look at him right away. "I know," she said. "I don't think I'll ever forgive myself for it." She turned to him then, her expression calm. "That's not how forgiveness works," she said. "You don't hold on to it forever. You learn from it, and you do better." Elijah nodded slowly. "I'm trying. I know you are." And that was enough. But while Elijah's life was rebuilding, Isabella's was unraveling. After fleeing with what she stole, Isabella moved from place to place, living off deception the way she always had. For a time, it worked. She manipulated, lied, and took advantage of others, always staying one step ahead. Until she wasn't. In a desperate attempt to steal from another wealthy target, things went wrong. What was supposed to be another calculated move turned into something far worse. A confrontation escalated, and in the chaos, a life was lost. That was the end of her running. Isabella was arrested, charged, and eventually sentenced to prison. The same woman who once walked confidently into Elijah's life, cloaked in elegance and control, now sat behind cold bars with nothing but the weight of her choices. No wealth, no power, no one to manipulate, just time and regret. Elijah heard about it through the news. He didn't celebrate, didn't seek her out, because by then he understood something important. Karma doesn't need an audience. Standing beside Denise one quiet evening, Elijah looked out at the life he had rebuilt. Not perfect, not untouched by pain, but real. "I almost lost everything that mattered," he said. Denise reached over, placing her hand gently over his. "But you didn't," she replied. He nodded. And this time he knew exactly why. Because love, real love, doesn't walk away when things get hard. It stays. It forgives. It rebuilds. And as Elijah sat there beside the woman who had chosen him from the very beginning, he made a silent promise. Never again. Never again would he trade something real for something that only looked like it. Finally, we have come to the end of this story. I hope you enjoyed the story. If so, do well to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.